Welcome to Health Oddity, the show that strips away the jargon and hype surrounding all things health and fitness to help you live a long, strong and energetic life. Lining up at the bar this week, here's Peter Lant, Paul Bassett and James St. Pierre.
Hello, and welcome to episode 162 of the Health Oddity podcast. We have for you a world first special double episode where we bring together two of the greatest coaching minds of the last 40 years. Between these two guys, they have almost 100 years of coaching experience. So this intro is a bit different today because we just hit record when Dan started firing questions at Phil. So here we have it, Dan John and Phil Maffetone meeting for the first time. Enjoy.
The George Martin technique. You got it, James. I got a lot of flack for that haircut thing. It was just a simple observation that I made working with athletes, professional athletes, in particular, runners, marathoners who, you know, some of them would, women would spend so much time putting makeup on the morning of the race because they knew they were going to be on TV, and then of course men and women would kind of, on the big events, they'd want to kind of get a haircut and spiff themselves up, and I just noticed that those people weren't performing their best over the few years that I was observing that. And it was sort of a passing thing in the book that I thought, well, here's something else I've observed. It's a simple observation, and obviously there's no scientific study, but scientific studies come from those simple observations. And one of these days, somebody's going to put the data together. We have 1,000 athletes, and how many of them got haircuts before? Anyway, boy, that was...
Well, I've got the perfect solution. Just shave your head and then just do that. Yeah. And it's always going to be the same, isn't it? Low maintenance. See, you heard it here first. There you go.
This is the thing about young people who shave their heads. It's like, trust me, put shaving off your head until you have to put.
Don't worry, I've got loads.
Phil, it's just in your new book on strength. I just thought was, and there's once again, you have Romanian deadlifts and you have overhead squats in your book, and I just looked at it, and I wouldn't want to say I began to weep, but I was as close to crying. Anybody who recommends overhead squats and Romanian deadlifts is got it right in my world.
A cool dude, I guess, huh?
That's what the hep kids say nowadays. Yes.
Cool. Should we just roll with this? I mean, we've started.
No, go ahead. Introduce us, James. Go ahead.
No. We were talking about this, and Paul had sent a message saying, "So how are we going to do this today?" And it was well.
Well, maybe we should introduce, just say, at least this Health Oddity, so people don't just kind of.
Yeah, but I think just keep
maybe
just do an introduction now. But we can almost just put this out from when we started talking, Pete, because I think it's going to be lovely just to hear Dan and Phil.
The very, very, very start. I'm gutted, and I remember Phil saying on your. I think it was the first time you came on about the like the Beatles when they just used to start recording and then they'd leave it all on the front.
As soon as the first Beatle came through the door, George Martin learned to roll the tape because there was so many cool things that happened. Luckily for us, they're all down on tape, and we've heard a lot of them.
Yeah, excellent. Well, yeah, I mean, we'll just roll with this and talk. I think if you're okay with that, Paul, aren't you?
Well, which episode are we on, guys?
Well, we are on episode 162, and this is Dan's 7th visit with us and Phil's 3rd visit with us, and this is the first time, I believe, that Dan and Phil have met on, in person, online, or anything. So no, it's fantastic. Yeah. So
well, it's worth saying that we've been building up to this for a while, haven't we? We've been talking about it for quite a while.
I think you've been practicing.
Yeah, two of the most respected coaches, typically seen on opposite ends of the kind of fitness world, on endurance and in strength. And what we combine this to make, almost like Power Rangers. When you combine two Power Rangers, you get the Megazord. and seeing if we can take it to the next level. But I think it's gonna be a fascinating discussion, and we're just gonna let it roll, really. And anyway, so welcome, Phil, and welcome, Dan. Lovely to have both of you on here.
Thanks, James. This is we were just together recently, and that was a lot of fun. This is already more fun. So thank you.
Yeah, well, we were talking about the music book that you just released, which is, the role of music in fitness. And obviously we had you on before where we went through kind of your general principles of fitness and health. And so you've been on twice, and Dan, as you said, he's seventh appearance. He definitely has appeared more times than me. So have you got a book coming up at the moment, Dan?
Well, yeah, Easy Strength for Fat Loss is out now and is good. So Phil, one of the things I do when I work with fat loss clients is I start with sleep. So I think the missing ingredient in a lot of people's health and fitness journey, and by the way, I use your definitions of health and fitness that I have my entire career. So thank you. I think sleep quality is always misunderstood. I don't think and then I like people to lift weights and then go for a walk. Now, I recommend your numbers on that walk, but the idea is if we can get a weight workout followed by a walk, for at least the clients I work with, that seems to be the magic. And then after that, we eat a meal with appropriate protein and vegetables. I mean, I really push the veggies. I try to get my people to eat 8 different kinds a day if possible. And, it's strange. I just basically summarize the entire book. And really it's, if I can get people to sleep, if I can get people to lift weights followed by walking on days you're not lifting, just either mobility work and walking. I think a lot of people, I think you can get away with it, Phil, up until about age 30 or so of just strict dieting and just go for it, brother. And, high end, but then you hit that wall and then you really start to break yourself. So that's
for sure. That's a good point. Younger people compensate to doing things wrong a lot better than those over 30. Yeah, 30, late 20s. By 30, we sort of hit this peak of compensation of many things from a health and fitness standpoint. And after that, people start noticing things not quite right, not quite the same. You're not as fast as you were. You need more sleep, and a lot of people, as you say, Dan, don't get it. So therefore, you don't recover from even an easy day of whatever you're doing, and that accumulated stress just makes for a downward spiral in the coming years.
What actually happens within the body to make that suddenly start? What is it that's triggering? I mean, I know we all age. Well, what is exactly happening?
Well, I would say there's good probably physiological or hormone things that go on. I mean, the Chernobyl experiment has been amazing. I'm not a big fan of nuclear waste, okay, but Chernobyl, humans can't live there, okay? But the mammal population is exploding. They all are dying of cancers, these poor mammals, the foxes, the bears, everybody, but they're exploding because they can still reproduce the first 2 or 3 years. The cancer builds up and then they die off young. So the mammal population of Chernobyl is thriving. Take that over to the humans. Part of my job on the planet Earth, and I've only done it twice, is to procreate. So so according to my DM, save resources, go, leave. And I think, so I personally think our first job is to survive long enough to procreate. At about age 30, move along. But the second thing, and I think this thing most people, is the accumulation. There's all those jokes. It's not the years, it's the miles and all those other things. If you're, like, especially as an athlete, I smash my face against the wall that time I did it when I was 14, those smashing my faces against the wall, all those years of going after it, sleeping 3 hours, having a double session, and all that accumulation, I think you finally hit a tipping point, and you just can't keep doing it. You've accumulated too much garbage, too much those tiny little nagging injuries. So I think both from a evolutionary perspective and from an accumulationist perspective. But Phil, I didn't mean to jump so fast on that.
Oh, no problem. It's a good explanation, and I certainly agree with that. Um, it, uh, we can zoom into the body, and I'm mentioning the body because it's different from the brain, as I'll get to in a moment. But the body, when we zero in on the biochemistry, for example, we see oxidative stress become a factor. And by age 30, our ability to control and balance this oxidative stress really begins to diminish. And so aging sort of hits this peak, and now we're on the other side of the peak. And although I think we're seeing the oxidative stress factor affecting younger and younger people today, which is another discussion. But so that's, from a biological standpoint, that oxidative stress factor is very, very key. The brain is different from the body. Our brain can continue to improve after age 30, way past 40 and 50 and 60 and 70 and 80 and 90, if we do the right things, if we live a healthy, balanced life. And we should have our best brain on the day we die.
Huh.
I was listening to your podcast, Dan, this week, and that's interesting because you were talking about, I think I listened to it this week. I'm not sure if it was this week's, I think it was, but it was the one where you were talking about the importance of play as you get older, and the physical play of, because someone had asked about maybe doing plyometrics and they were in their 30s or something. And you'd said about, playing tag and playing and getting on the floor and actively playing, but then also the kind of mental play of mind games and cards and various and Pete's holding up a large Rubik's cube, that kind of the mental play. And I know that you spoke, Phil, when we had you on before, like you just said, about the brain should actually be able to keep getting better all through our lives if we look after it properly and use it properly.
Yeah, and that's how the brain is built. It repairs itself. We have the trillions of connections we have in the brain are almost unlimited. We could, even when we're 50 and 60 and 70, we've made a lot of connections. We've learned a lot of things. We have a lot of experiences. We have a lot of aha moments, but we haven't even tapped into the possibilities of a lot more of those. And so we just keep going. And the, neuroplasticity is a well-accepted thing now. Making new brain cells finally is pretty well accepted in the scientific community. So we need to keep going. Even a podcast like this for us, but for the listeners, we make connections in the brain we've never made before. What a concept. Something in our brain happened that has never existed. It's kind of like creating art.
It's weird that you say art, because both of you are great writers. I first came across Dan because of his books, and then that led me to podcasts and things like that. And yourself, I listened to a podcast and someone recommended your book, and one of your quotes was no pain, no brain. I think it was the quote in the Big Book of Endurance. And both of you have you tell stories around fitness. It's not just about the mechanics. The brain is very, when you talk about being an art, and the body and the brain really responds to narrative, doesn't it? And the brain is involved in that narrative. And both of you talk about
it sure does.
Dan, you have extensive stories where you're talking about your past and you're talking about people's journeys, because the story is key, isn't it? Dan.
Well, I agree. There's a couple. There's so many things. You say that, and I like that, Phil, because now my head's exploding. First, I want to show you my chessboard, my Connect Four board, and then there's my tic-tac-toe board. Those are in my office. Those are things while I'm talking with somebody who's maybe struggling with an athletic thing, we might play a game at Connect Four while we plan out the upcoming season if they're struggling, just to get them out of that, that tunnel, The other thing, I take dance, I take dance lessons on Monday, and I go to I dance on Thursday nights. I'm a horrible dancer. It's okay for me to admit it. Don't say I'm not. I am. Okay. But the idea is, one of my best friends is 91 and he dances. Merrill goes to everything. I've mentioned him on this podcast before. He was an eyewitness to the first atomic bomb blast. And he's still dances with me. When you're with somebody like that, you suddenly see that my next 25 years of my life aren't sitting in a chair watching. One of the things too, I'd like to say, when you talked about storytelling, you'll notice I just told several stories there, but Merrill's story gives me that vision of what I want to be when I grow up, and I think that's important. Phil, I know that your early work was with Mark Allen, but how did you make all those connections to come up with that Everybody's an Athlete book? That book almost seems by itself to be a whole system. How long have you been working on that to piece all that together? Can you talk about that if you don't mind?
Sure. It's a good question, and I don't really know the answer. I sort of would say it goes back to high school from a philosophical standpoint, where I began thinking about philosophy and studying Eastern and Western cultures, and at some point the holistic paradigm kind of just fell on me, and I said, "Oh, it's all we're all one. It's all connected, and anything we do here is going to affect us way over there somewhere." So being interested in sports and then nutrition and all the other things, everything became easier because they were not separate entities with unrelated or no connections. They were all connected, and that was sort of the beginning. And then putting the proverbial 2 and 2 together along the way, many different 2 and 2s together. And Mark came along a little bit later. I think he was probably 5 years into, when I was coaching, and I did see a lot of runners in the beginning, because that was in 1977. It was the running boom was everything. You hardly saw a cyclist. Triathlon hadn't come from the West Coast US yet, and over to me on the East Coast, and I was seeing some strength related people in the very beginning. I saw a bunch of bodybuilders, and was able to help the first guy I saw with a bunch of injuries, and he I want to say, unfortunately, sent me a bunch of his friends. And I realized that I can't do this. This is and this is in part what led me to being fit but unhealthy. And that paradigm is that these individuals were willing to sacrifice their health to look better, and we all want to look more cool. I've kind of given up, but we all want to look more cool, and which is a big reason why people are going to gravitate to weights, because they want to look cool. I wish they had the same energy for being healthy. When you're healthy, I can't imagine being any more cool. But anyway, so it all kind of came together some decades ago, and I've really built upon that foundation all along the way. And the music, when I became a songwriter, I thought I was changing careers and quickly realized that I was just adding something to what I was already doing. And but that's it's this long journey, and the amazing things you see along the way are all related.
Yeah, I was, the reason I say it is the clarity of that book is just so, you go chapter by chapter by chapter. And as I was reading it, even the first time, you have that section on, the high end of fitness is about 12 weeks a year. So I'm from the classic track and field tradition. I went to Utah State, and we had a wonderful coach, Ralph Mon, and he believed that a track season is about 12 weeks. And if you go 13, and it's interesting because your book says you can probably do the hard anaerobic stuff about 12 weeks a year. He also believed, like you, that a competition was a workout, which, by the way, I say that out, when I say something like that out loud, I can't believe people don't consider their competitions, they're not a workout. If you're running the 400 meters, it might only last 46 seconds, but that's probably enough for the day, So that shocked me. I was reading your book, and so that you provided me that window to get me, and I still struggle with these people who think they can do their sport 365 days a year. Because I just don't know how, without anabolic intervention, how the body can survive that. Would you mind talking how
it can't survive it, and that's the problem. And another part of the problem is that we are in a no pain no gain society, and athletes are put on a pedestal, and we look at these athletes like they're gods. And when they fall during competition and die of a heart attack at age 28, we get confused, and then we try not to look because what I thought he was a god, how could he die? And so there's this philosophical thing, this psychological thing, that as a society, this concept of no pain no gain has infiltrated us for a long, long time. Benjamin Franklin came up with that phrase, most likely, although he might have borrowed it from the Old Testament or some biblical something. But it's been taken and abused and turned into some bizarre concept, some bizarre idea in every sector of society. It's not just in sports. No pain, no gain is everywhere. It's in corporate America. It's in our school systems, of course, the colleges and universities, and the professional, the people that are studying to be doctors and therapists, just like lawyers and other professionals. The whole system is tainted because by the time these people get out of school, and I know what it's like because I was one of them, we're burned out. And we're just starting a career, in healthcare. What a bizarre situation. So, we have to take control. We're in charge of ourselves, not the school, not the government, not healthcare, not the lawyers. We are in charge, and we choose the people we want to work with. And if it's not working, we go elsewhere. At least that's how it should work.
Well, I do have to blame you for one thing people make fun of me about. Salad for breakfast, okay? I eat vegetables every meal, and most of my friends think I'm a lunatic. One quick thing, you talked about V8 in your book. Now, this is an older book, so I get it, but I really found the idea of eating salad for breakfast and then kind of using a vegetable drink as a supplement. When I read that, even though I agreed with it, because up there is all the strength and health magazines of my youth, So I've been a strength and health guy since, 1965. But salad for breakfast, the emphasis on vegetables. You were an outlier when you first came up with it, I think, but now it's kind of mainstream. Is there any nutritional interventions that you've kind of changed? Anything that you can help me with?
I'm asked that a lot. I don't know how to answer it. I think I've fine-tuned my ideas along the way, sometimes a lot. It's like writing a song, you know. I think it was Michelangelo that said, art is never finished. We just put it aside. But we always go back to it and tweak it. And Leonard Cohen was very famous for that. He'd ponder a short sentence, a short lyric for months and months and years, and before tweaking it. And I've learned to do that, and it's really helpful. And I've done the same with the health and fitness world. Much of it has to do with the research that comes along and confirms the observations we made years ago. But I think the important thing is that I've been living some of the recommendations I made early on, which is that as we age, as we change our life, as we go maybe from one sport to another, as we go through life, certainly as we age in particular, we need to find out what works for us at this new age. We need to keep refining our needs, and they will change, not dramatically, but slightly. And having recommended that for so many years, and now living it, I could see how many changes I've made. Not dramatic, but significant enough to make a difference in my health. So that's a very important thing.
Can you Phil, maybe tell us about a few of those changes and what you do with your kind of nutrition and stuff now for yourself at the age that you, because I believe you're both in your 60s now, aren't you? I think yourself and Dan.
Well, thank you.
Sorry. Sorry.
I've made some good headway into the 70s, so I'm
oh, well, okay.
Okay. So thanks. I probably the most obvious is the carbohydrate factor, my carbohydrate needs. When I was younger, and when I was younger, I already went through this thing of avoiding junk food, staying away from processed stuff. It was really hard because the companies were so deceptive, to the point where there could be a big label that says no sugar added, but the law was, well, if you, the company selling this container of stuff, didn't add sugar, you could say no sugar added, but the manufacturer you bought the raw material from added sugar. We think it's better now. It is a little better, but there's always these deceptive practices that the manufacturers have. And whenever the label laws change, for example, they're ready for the next round of deception. So you have to kind of fight that. But in the beginning, getting rid of the junk food, easier said than done, but getting rid of that was a big thing. So my carbohydrate intake was sort of maybe modest. I want to say maybe 40% of my diet was carbohydrate. Much of that was high fiber carbohydrate. And then, you know, as I hit my 30s, my carbohydrate intake, I discovered, needed to come down. And then, you know, by my 40s, it came down more. By my 50s, even more and more. And at some point, it was a lot lower. And it hits a point where your metabolism shifts and you're able to, well, kind of all along the way, because carbohydrates, among the things it can do is it can increase your need for calories. So as you reduce your carbohydrate, your caloric needs overall are reduced. And of course, we know from animal studies that the best way to increase longevity in an animal is to restrict their caloric intake. The game with humans is easier said than done, because if you just cut out foods, you're going to cut out nutrients. So you've got to change your metabolism. So metabolically, you need less calories than you did 20 years earlier. And that's a reality. And I'm probably 30. My daily requirements are probably 30% less than they were, I'd say 15 years ago.
So that's your total caloric requirement. The total amount of calories per day is about 30% less than it was. Okay.
Yeah, yeah. And those calories primarily come from fat and protein, primarily from fat. So I'm eating the classic human diet, which is higher fat, moderate protein, very low carbohydrate. And indeed, much of that carbohydrate is the high fiber carbohydrate. And
So
Dan, this is another thing you might want to share with your people ask me, what I eat, what kind of diet am I on? Well, at first I say I'm not on a diet. I eat what I have discovered is best for me. And essentially, I'm a meat-eating vegetarian.
I'll make a note of that. I like that.
I see Dan writing it down. He's going to get...
Yeah, Phil, you were actually when you came out with your book in 86, 87, but you remember it was the anti-fat, fat phobic 80s. If you
it was not just fat phobic, but it was everything was carbohydrate. And people didn't realize that the running magazines, the weight, everything was heavily influenced by advertising, and that advertising was primarily carbohydrate stuff. So they would never say anything bad about carbohydrate. And of course, they would say bad things about low fat, the low fat boom in the book industry and the weight loss, and huge. It's still huge. And in 50 years, we have developed an over-fat pandemic worldwide, in developing countries too.
We're seeing now in England, at least, I don't know if it's in America, but there is a like you said about the packaging with the no added sugar. Now we're seeing kind of these convenience processed foods that they've cottoned onto this added protein or high protein, and they're essentially kind of processed foods where they're trying to tell you that they're healthier because they're adding protein in, because there is now a degree of, I suppose, understanding, or a degree of media attention on the importance of eating protein. So in a similar way, you're getting these packet foods, which could be even things like packet breakfast cereals and things like that, but they've just slapped on them a big star, high in protein or a good source of protein. And even things like chocolate spreads and peanut butter, all these kind of processed things, but they're now selling them as high protein. And it's just in the same way. It's the same as the low fat, the low sugar, but it's all the other stuff they put in, because these are all highly processed foods,
Yeah, and it's the lowest quality protein. It's all plant protein, which is not complete protein, and which means it's cheap. It's all about the money.
When, for example, I don't do well with soy protein. My body does not like it, and it's really clear it doesn't like it. And yet that's the most common thing I see when
and it's very highly processed soy protein. You keep processing soy, and you get the soy concentrate first, and that's the safest, but it doesn't taste very good and it's more expensive. Then you got the isolated soy, and you eventually end up, if you keep going, with MSG actually. But those sources of protein are poor they're highly processed, they're cheap, and so you see them all over. And you know, the supplements, you know, that's the question that comes up next, is what do we use for supplements? Well, the best protein supplements are the egg white powders or the whole egg powders, and whey. Whey is a wonderful protein source. Lots of immune factors associated with whey, which is the most nutritious part of milk. And I try to make my own whey. You can get it, if you get Jersey milk, if you get the small cow healthy milk and make cheese, you'll end up with some whey, and you just strain that, and now you've got the most amazing immune boosting protein you can get.
Oh, wow, that's really good. Thank you. That's good advice. Wow.
It's been evident over the years, and really our conversation on food probably highlights this, is the role of technology in advancement of human performance, but also in healthcare. But both of you on the forefront of human performance. You know, both of you competed. Dan, you've worked with many athletes in their own careers, and you still work very closely with many people to get them to peak performance. And obviously you spread that message to wider population. The same with you, Phil. You have a history of kind of creating world champions. And so both of you played, I'm no doubt, with technology, Phil, with you and the heart rate monitors. But we're coming into an era really where technology is accelerating in a way that probably none of us really understand. With ChatGPT, AI, you know, you've got AGIs out there that are really taking things to the next level potentially, and people are searching for ways of leveraging that technology. And I'm wondering if it'd be interesting to see both your perspectives, having started, we're talking about your books coming out in the 80s, and obviously started your careers in the 70s, 60s. What you see the role of this technology will be, because it's inevitably will just take over everything, and it can be used well and poorly. So, Dan, from a track perspective, and the strength perspective, how do you see the technology starting to influence us in better or worse?
Well, there's been almost no. It's when you sit back and you look at world records and you look at Olympic numbers, we've stalled in track and field. Track and field has improved. David Epstein has an excellent TED talk where he does this with his hands. That's Usain Bolt breaking the world record, and that's Jesse Owens in the 1936 Olympics. That's the difference. And it's amazing. And if you had Jesse Owens on the track that Usain Bolt runs on with the starting block, Jesse Owens had a little trowel to dig his starting blocks. We haven't really moved in track and field. And one of the things now, obviously, you know, there's some outliers like Krauser and some of the others, but what I think is track and field is a wonderful sport to study right now, because I think we've hit or come really close to the human limits. We're pushing right against it. Now, in a sport like triathlon, just something as simple, when triathlons first happened, guys were in T-shirts and floppy shorts and running shoes, and they would ride their bicycles with running shoes on. And their transitions took 5 minutes, right? Well, so a lot of things in technology at first finds the easy holes, the easy fixes. Track and field is out of those. Track and field, unless they changed the discus, they did. They changed the javelin so it wouldn't fly as far. But so one of the reasons I like track and field so much is that we've kind of hit the human limits. What doesn't make any sense to me is how swimmers keep going faster, because I thought we'd hit those barriers. So one of the things I worry about, and Peter Attia has this new book called Outlive, and if you go to a gym now, a lot of people now have that little continuous glucose monitor thing up here. And if you read all the information you get, you could also just go to the American Diabetic Association's handouts from the 1970s and get the exact same information. Spinach has no impact on your glucose. Cutting edge information from when I was in junior college. Eating more mixed foods, cutting edge information from when my mom told me to do that. Eat a meal with protein, veggies, and we would have fruit as a dessert. A lot of the stuff we're using the technology. Oh, I got a good night's sleep, so my little machine told me I feel better. Yeah, no shit. I got 9 hours of sleep. I had a 15-minute meditation. Oh, look, I'm glowing green today. Well, yeah, so I'm not discounting technology. I think there's a real value. You're the one who got me, Phil, to use a heart rate monitor. But once I figured out that I can almost tell you my heart rate within about 20 points, because I can talk to you when I'm at my correct place, when I'm doing my walk or I use heavy hands, Phil, because I do weighted, I put the weights in my hands because I've got, I've been lifting since 1965. Shockingly, I have some joint issues. Go figure. Yeah. So that's my response. It's good, but a lot of it's just
marketing, I suppose.
I would use the word hype.
Okay. I didn't want to say it because I'm a nice person, but
I like to just blurt things out. That's why I don't have any friends. So when I think the technology has a lot of value. We can often see what we're doing on paper. Where way back, I would have athletes bring me their workout schedule, and they'd have this book, and they'd have everything was written down, scribbling, and what does this say? Oh, I'm not sure. Now we got graphs and charts, and but I can guarantee you people often don't pay attention to what the data is telling them. Oh, I know it says I shouldn't work out today, but my friends are working out, so I guess I will too. But I think there's a lot of hype, and there's a lot of hype because there's a lot of technology developed by companies that are looking to make money, and so we've all been through a lot of the tech stuff over the years. We all went through having lactose measuring devices and glucose meters and stride length. I don't, if you can think of anything, it's already been made, and the trend of it has come and gone. When I first thought about this heart rate thing, there were no wireless heart monitors. I had to use a cardiac monitor that was used in the hospital to monitor cardiac patients, and I just took it and slapped it on an athlete and said, let's run around the track, and you look down at the window of this thing under your shirt and tell me what the heart rate is. And my idea was that this was going to be it was a biofeedback device, and as a biofeedback device, it meant we wouldn't have to use it all the time. As Dan said, you know where you are, and I've won a lot of bets from people saying, we should know our heart rate pretty much right on if you've used a monitor for any length of time. You know how 146 feels, no matter what your age is. You know how 88 feels. And I was able to do that. So my idea was that, okay, we're gonna put a monitor on an athlete. We're gonna have them do their run, their ride, their whatever their sport is. They're gonna know how they feel at a certain heart rate. They're gonna know that as time goes on, they could do more at the same heart rate. This is classic biofeedback. And then after a short while, they're not going to need to wear a heart monitor. Well, the wireless monitors came out in '83 maybe, and people just jumped on them. and most people are unable to, if they're really interested in knowing their heart rate, they're unable to do it without a heart monitor because they never put the two and two together. They never benefited from that biofeedback process, which is a learning process. And so that's sort of the sad part about technology, is that it's very helpful, but we shouldn't become dependent on it. We should learn from it and use our instincts and intuition to take it from there, because those features of the human brain will give us a whole lot more.
I listened to a podcast recently, Phil, and it was Mark Allen was on with Brad Kearns, I think, and he was talking about you as well back in the day and all the training and things. And he said when he was training that he had a very basic heart rate monitor back then, and a stopwatch, that you just an old-fashioned stopwatch that you'd use and they were the two things, he said. And all the things that people have got now, he obviously coaches people now, for triathlon and Ironman and things. All the developments that we have now, the two things that he would still recommend is a stopwatch and a heart rate monitor, and all these developments that we have had in the last 20 or 30 years. Really, that's all you need for performance, which is interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. And a lot of these tech items are may serve a purpose initially if you don't know what your blood sugar is. Well, if you could just look to see what it is, at some point you feel what a blood sugar of 87 feels like. You feel what 99 feels like. And so at a given moment in time, I have I've done this so much, I have a pretty good idea what my blood sugar is at any point along the way. And of course, hunger is connected with that. And as our blood sugar changes, we get hungry at a certain point. And the game sometimes for many people is to don't get to that point of hunger where your brain alerts you, have a small meal and keep things stable. But when cortisol, when salivary cortisol testing came out, I don't know, 95, I want to say, that was a huge thing, because stress, physical stress, biochemical stress, mental, emotional stress was the name of the game. Whether you're just, somebody who wants to jog a little bit but be healthy, or you're an athlete trying to make the Olympic team, controlling stress was the key. And some of these people were so stressed, and you couldn't send them to a lab to measure cortisol because they're coming at you with a needle and that's going to shoot your cortisol up. So those were not accurate tests. So we had to do the evaluation of stress sort of verbally, by asking questions and seeing how people, not just what they say, but how they say it. And then when the salivary cortisol came out, we could measure people several times through the day, and it was really good. And I used it on a lot of athletes, a lot of patients for a number of years. And at some point I realized, wait a minute, I was getting these results before as a using my assessment tools, just asking questions and getting feedback from people. And so I'm, except for difficult cases, I'm not going to keep doing that because I already know what their cortisol is. So the tech stuff has value, but get rid of it when you don't need it anymore.
That's really interesting, because I think about this in my head about people who read like lots and lots of self-help books and they've got a stack of them like that, but they've not implemented anything. Or people when they're on antidepressants, which is meant to be a short stop just to deal with the problem, not deal with the problem, sorry, deal with the symptom. But then you come off them, but the people, they stay on them for the rest of their lives, don't they? And that there was a guy who I know who was monitoring his sleep, like what Dan was saying earlier, monitoring his sleep, and he was getting stressed because he wasn't getting very good sleep, and he couldn't work out why. So it was actually, so he was really good though. He stopped using it. He just said, it's stressing me out, and he's now sleeping better. So I think that's really interesting. It's basically it's getting the data, and then it's actually saying, right, what are you going to do with it? How are you going to use that data to manage your own world, basically? And I think that's amazing. So
Yeah, that's a good point. And just to piggyback onto that, the signs and symptoms that people have, they're very valuable. We shouldn't get mad at ourselves because we don't sleep, or we shouldn't get mad at ourselves because our shoulder hurts. We should think, why does my shoulder hurt? Why don't I sleep? And figure out where it comes from. That's what, as a clinician, that's what I always did. Okay, you've got knee pain. Well, tell me about your shoes. Tell me about, how often are you barefoot or whatever. It's not just about the knee; it's about the whole picture, and figuring out the cause and then correcting it, of course.
But one of the reasons. Sorry, Dan, are you gonna?
I got. Go.
As I say, one of the reasons we got both of you on, because obviously we've interviewed a lot of guests, but both of you have written extensively on really how to manage stress when it comes to creating change and transform your body into whatever goal you have, whether it's kind of very high levels of strength or very high levels of endurance. Both of you have written books. Phil, you've obviously got your entire philosophy built around that MAF method, where you're working within the comfort zone, the aerobic zone. And then Dan, you've written extensively on weight training and the easy strength method. So stress plays a massive, massive role in how you guys are talking about developing people's bodies. Do you feel, I mean, in terms of, do you feel that you have similar philosophies? Do you think there's fundamental differences in the way that you approach things, Dan, to say Phil? Because you've read quite extensively on Phil's work. Do you think there's anything that kind of contradicts? Do you think you have a different approach at all, that the strength world maybe sees the world differently to Phil?
I have stolen everything I can from Phil. Proud to say, I think I've read everything you've written. I when you come out with something, I'm usually the first person to click the button. What helped me with Phil is that he was the first person who gave me kind of permission to not just do. I mean, every athlete's periodized. There's not this idea that the Soviets invented. Please throw that nonsense out. The Greeks did this thing. I can't remember. Philostratus was this guy who wrote about how they basically trained these 4-day blocks. There's nothing. The Greeks, 2,000 years ago, Greeks, the Olympic. I mean, there's nothing new here. What was killing me in the 80s, literally killing me, was this nonsense that, it's always balls to the wall. It's always 100%. It's always, and I was and like so many of my athletes, even that coach or my friends, if you weren't in the gym, your competitor was. And all of a sudden I just said, I can't do this anymore. I had I wouldn't say I was near death, but I had a very serious issue from the Middle East, and I had all this stuff. And it's like, Kevin gives me your book and I'm reading it. And it's like, well, no wonder I used to do better when I trained. I used to have this thing every year called the Big Push, about 12 weeks. And I read your book and no. So everything I say now, Phil, you heard him already say he worked with bodybuilders, and bodybuilders are willing to be unhealthy to look good on the platform. Many athletes are willing to sacrifice their longevity by shortcuts. I don't work with either of those. I don't work with athletes who are willing to I want my athletes to be grandparents and great-grandparents and great-great-grandparents if possible. I want my athletes to be, happy and alive in their late 60s and early 70s, Phil, for as long as they can. Phil and I would just say, when you read my work, you'll notice that the easy strength method, and Phil, I don't know how familiar you are with it, but the idea is that you just keep you just keep coming back. And the formula for me, I train 5 days a week. One of the days is just a mobility session. I hate to even call it a training session, but my vision is 5 by 52. And if you lift weights 3 days a week, the system is 3 by 52. 52 weeks of 3 workouts in the weight room. If at the end of 52 weeks you're not strong, well, I don't know what you're doing, but you can't get strong in one workout. You can't become the Ironman triathlon winner in one session. That was something. If there's anything I feel good about, is my vision now is, 8 years. It's what Coach Ralph Maughan told me in 1977. I don't know if you know this, Phil, but I went to Utah State and I leaned in and I said, "What's the secret to throwing the discus for?" And he said, "Lift weights 3 days a week." And okay, got it. Throw a discus 4 days a week. Okay, I got it. For the next 8 years. And everybody misses that last tiny little phrase. And for me, I think you show up to me at age 13. I want to talk about 60 years from now. Let's talk about 6 decades from now too. Let's not just talk about the next 6 weeks. Let's talk about the next 6 decades. So that's.
Yeah. And you're right. It's a hard sell. It's a hard sell, and it's a hard sell all along the spectrum of abilities, from the beginning person who's never done anything and now they're 25 and they're seeing 30 and being over the hill and they want to start doing something, to the great high school athlete and the college great college athlete who got a scholarship and now they're going into the pros. And it's a hard sell. And there's I want to say there's nothing we could do about it, but we will try anyway. And if they have to get really hurt and run down and beat to death almost to really get it, then it's not my fault. But I still will help them when they come crawling back.
That was episode 162. Please tune in next week for episode 163, where we carry on this amazing conversation. Thank you for listening. We appreciate you all.
You've been listening to Health Odyssey with Peter Lant, Paul Bassett, and James St. Pierre. To get your regular fix of hype-free health, you can subscribe and leave a review wherever you get your favorite podcasts. You can find out more on today's and other topics at healthodyssey.com, or find us on Facebook or Instagram by searching for Health Odyssey.